You knew it was coming, and now it's finally here. A day of reckoning. I'm going to drop some truth bombs on you, my unsuspected but loyal audience. And there may be collateral damage to some persistent mythologies that you may have fallen for in the past. What if I told you that fully funding our national defense budget makes us less safe, makes the world less stable, makes it harder to support, as every patriotic American should, our men and women in uniform, who put their lives on the line to protect their fellow Americans from foreign enemies? You've been told the opposite, again and again, from most Republicans and Democrats, from the permanent political class in Washington, D.C., a complex that does not go away even when we elect a new president from the other political party. But they are wrong, and maybe even deceitful about their real motives. Maybe, just maybe, those who would keep spending borrowed dollars to fund endless wars overseas are motivated by things other than America's national defense. Wait, you say, national defense is one of the few necessary and legitimate functions of our federal government. We should surely, fully fund it. But if you believe in limited government, you know all government programs, even the ones created with the best of intentions, including the most necessary ones, suffer from the perverse political incentives that make government grow. Appropriators like to spend more money because it grows their power, and they like to direct those funds to their favored interest groups and parochial projects. That's just the way it is, regardless of the budget function. National education, national health care, national welfare, or national defense. Take the word national off these things and we would all universally agree, left and right, that they are essential for a free and civil society. But we know governments screw things up. That's just the way it is. So why do we think that all of the special interests that drive government decisions on healthcare and education somehow magically disappear when getting it right is most important? Libertarians, classical liberals, and constitutional conservatives all subscribe to George Washington's skepticism towards what he called entangling alliances when it comes to our role overseas. We should try to mind our own business and not get involved in other nations' conflicts. We should avoid taking sides in civil wars between competing religions and tribes. We should never be so arrogant to presume that Americans' foreign policy experts could redesign some other nation's government, rebuilding it from the top down based on some abstract theory imagined by the smartest neoconservative or progressive central planners. We should try as best we can to follow a non-aggression principle. If a foreign country has not attacked us, why would we attack them? These are first principles of foreign policy, but in practice, they're more reasonable, practical, and realistic. In this way, I'm not an isolationist, as some would claim. I'm a foreign policy realist. Maybe I'm actually a globalist, if by that misused word, you mean peaceful cooperation and trade across national borders. I'm not a pacifist by any stretch, but I believe that the American military should be used strictly for, well, national defense. But instead, the military has become something far less useful, far more wasteful, and I believe dangerous to our national security. Held hostage by special interests and political game playing, the military doesn't defend America first, for the simple reason that many other purposes and agendas have taken first priority. When our troops are used to interfere in civil wars halfway across the globe, when they are used as pawns in diplomatic power struggles, when they are sent into dangerous situations in an effort to manipulate the price of oil, it all seems like a cruel joke. These things don't help defend America. They don't represent a response to a clear and present danger. They make us less safe. And then there's the astronomical costs. I'm not just talking about the trillions of dollars we pour into military spending. We're talking about people's lives. Since we invaded Afghanistan 18 years ago, a lifetime for many young people, thousands of Americans have perished on battlefields in the Middle East, fighting with no clear objective, no exit strategy, and no defined conditions for victory. The ones that survive often come home exhausted, traumatized, and sometimes physically or mentally broken. You would hope that the same government sending them into peril would be ready and able to take care of them when they return home. But the Veterans Administration has a well-documented history of completely failing our wounded soldiers. What is it all for? Remember, political decision-making, despite professed good intentions, is always shaped by personal interests, special interests, economic interests, the interests of insiders. Are we really fighting over the price of oil? Is it really about lucrative defense contracts and appropriations dollars that just have to keep flowing to feed the machine? Or is it just a fatal conceit that we can and should design the world based on some professor's twisted sense of intellectual superiority? If we want answers, we should be willing to ask tough questions, precisely because our national defense is the first responsibility of constitutionally limited government. There it is. The dialogue, the monologue, the rant, the rave that I've always wanted to do. It's inspired a little bit by Ron Paul's final speech on the House floor, maybe even more so by Judge Napolitano's final rant on Fox News when his show ended. I'll give them a hat tip for that, but it makes a little bit of sense because things here at Kibbe on Liberty are changing. It's the end of an era, and in some ways, this is the final show of the first season of Kibbe on Liberty. But don't freak out, you're already freaking out, and I'm here to tell you that the next iteration, the next season, the new, improved, much more awesome Kibbe on Liberty is going to be something even better, even bigger, and I want to talk about that a little bit today. As you can see, it's Christmas here on the Kibbe on Liberty set. We've had thousands of elves working for weeks to prepare the set for this moment because we wanted to celebrate. We wanted to celebrate the first season, but more importantly, this idea that the ideas that we talk about on this show, the values of liberty, this sometimes different point of view than you get from Republicans or Democrats, that's something that young people are hungry for. That's something that they're searching for. And it's not gonna happen through your typical kind of angry clickbait that political partisans love to do on both sides of the aisle. In that us versus them thing, the whole liberty philosophy is lost. But the counter-revolution, or maybe it's the counter-revolution, is towards meaningful conversations about real ideas without all of the gotcha questions and without the yelling back and forth. People actually listening to each other, people asking really difficult and tough questions and then trying to answer them without anybody being shamed because they didn't have the right soundbite. So we're moving the platform here towards where I think young people are moving. They're looking at things like Dave Rubin and Jordan Peterson and all of these conversations that are happening on social media, but also platforms where there can be independence, where there won't be censorship. That to me is what the new BlazeTV is going to be all about, and we are going to be free to speak truth to power. Even when some of my colleagues at BlazeTV might disagree with me. Imagine that, free speech, freedom to say what you want, freedom to argue, freedom to think outside the box, and maybe, just maybe, even question the legitimacy of the military-industrial complex. That's what we're going to be doing starting next year, and I want you to join me on that journey because it's going to be fantastic. Everything we've been working on in this program is leading us to this new model. So today we're going to take you to the very deconstructed, unready set of the new Kibbe on Liberty. But before I do that, I want to give you a sneak peek of what I'm talking about when I talk about substantive conversations. It makes a lot of sense that we decided that first conversation, sort of the prototype, the experiment, would be with Senator Rand Paul. There's so much going on right now in regards to foreign policy, in our ongoing struggle to get the US government out of, say, a civil war in Yemen. It's a good idea to get out, and there is actually some movement in the right direction. And we got a chance to sit down with Senator Paul and not just talk about Yemen, not just talk about Saudi Arabia, but let's talk about this framework of skepticism towards intervention. Like, intervention should be the last thing And what are the unintended consequences of a government military that gets too involved in too many things that are none of their damn business? Check out this cool interview I had with Rand. You know, a lot of libertarians talk about George Washington when he warned us about entangling alliances, and libertarians love to quote him. But for you, it's a practical, realist perspective on foreign policy. Can you tell me a little bit about where you come from?
Well, so it's a little bit of both. That I don't believe we ought to be involved in entangling alliances. I think we shouldn't be intervening in other countries' civil wars, and that really war should be determined by Congress, as the Constitution said. That's where we're supposed to declare war. And so we've had this long-running battle, and it's really gotten away from us. I also am a realist in the sense that I think we don't go to war to try to have regime change around the world, even if Congress were voting on it. So it's one thing whether we should vote or not, but if it were to come to me and I were actually having to vote on whether to go to war, I would be a realist in the sense that I don't think we should go to war for regime change or because we don't like certain rulers. We go to war for very specific and limited reasons, and that's we're attacked or our national security is threatened. Unfortunately, the debate got dumbed down somewhere along the way, and everything is in our national security interest. And I try to point out to people that's a conclusion. So it's sort of like a jury trial. We have facts on both sides of the issues. You have two sets of facts. You got to decide what to believe, and then you decide, is it in our national security interest? But everybody bandies it about here. Well, it's in our national security interest. Like, well, explain to me how Yemen is in our national security interest. So I think it's a dose of realism when we vote on it, and then it's sort of libertarian constitutionalism that we should vote on it. You know what I mean? And I don't know that things are improving around here, but I think that the death of the dissident Khashoggi has riled people up. Partisan politics has probably riled some of them up. And then altogether it fits nicely with some like Mike Lee and I who actually truly believe that you shouldn't go to war unless Congress votes on it.
You know, a lot of people are looking at Libya, and you were probably the first and most vocal critic of the Obama administration in their attempt at regime change. It's created nothing but chaos and death in that country. And it sort of reminds me of Bastiat's warning about the unseen consequences of actions. Is that the idealism or is that the realism?
A little bit of both. And but I think it also points out something, that everything right now is seen through the lens of Trump, pro, anti-Trump. Everything's got to be about Trump. And so you got to remind people in the mainstream media, you know, the war in Yemen actually started under Obama. The war in Libya actually started under Obama. I'll never forget President Obama coming to our Republican lunch, and there's 40 or 50 of us at lunch. And I raised my hand and I said, well, you know, when you ran for office, there were some things I liked. One of the things you said was we would never go to war. No president should go to war without Congress approving it unless we were under imminent attack. And he kind of laughed and said, oh, you know, people like quoting back things to me. Well, yeah, I said that. And I said, well, how would you explain going to war in Libya? And he said, well, Benghazi was under threat of imminent attack. And I said, really? I didn't realize that when you meant imminent attack, you meant imminent attack of any city in any country, anywhere, that you would just intervene for that reason. And see, that's the bizarre sort of convoluted way that he brought himself to believe in that, but as disappointment. But really, to me, it's not about Trump, it's not about Obama, it's about war and trying to really prevent our involvement in war unless we absolutely have to, obeying the Constitution. And to me, it doesn't matter who's president, really. I opposed the Libyan war under Obama, I opposed the Syrian war under Obama, Hillary Clinton, I've opposed the Yemen war under first Obama and now Trump.
You know, our entangling alliance with Saudi Arabia is a great example of sort of the bipartisan nature of no matter who's president, no matter who's in charge of Congress, it seems like we keep doing the same thing over and over again. Is it both parties that don't appreciate the limited purpose of our foreign policy?
I think it's a little bit of this idea from the Cold War that we always have to choose sides. And so Iran is the great evil, and so Saudi Arabia, well, they're kind of evil too, but they're the lesser of two evils. And so that is the prevailing foreign policy view around here, Republican and Democrat. If you look on any of the committees, the hierarchy of the committee, there's not much difference between the Republicans and Democrats. And they really truly believe if we do not support Saudi Arabia, as evil as they are, Iran will conquer the world. And it's like, really? Israel's got 400 nuclear weapons. I don't think anybody's, dislodging Israel anytime. In fact, I think Israel would fare fairly well if Iran were to attack Israel. I don't think it would be a one-sided Iranian affair. Same way with Saudi Arabia. I mean, Saudi Arabia and the Gulf Sheikdom surrounding them, they spend 8 times more on their military than Iran does. So really there is an arms race over there. And every time we support the Saudis, Iran then feels like they have to keep developing their weapons, to keep parity as well as they can with Saudi Arabia. So then they look to the Soviet Union and China and North Korea and all these other places, and it just keeps going on and on. And I think it's one of the things that we haven't figured out we could do a lot better on is we talk about a peace plan for the Middle East, and they're only talking about the Palestinians. Well, sure, that is a problem over there and has been for a long time. But I think there's even a bigger problem in the Middle East that involves the entire Middle East, and that's this Sunni-Shia sort of 1,000-year-old battle, between mostly led by the Saudis on the Sunni side and the Iranians on the Shia side. But Iran intervenes throughout the Middle East whenever they see any Shia population that needs defending or, is on the rise. So that's the same in Yemen, it's the same in Syria, it's the same in Iraq.
Why won't Congress, it strikes me that the Constitution is quite clear on this. Congress has the ultimate authority to declare war. War powers are vested with them, and yet they cede that to the administration, Republican or Democrat. Why won't they take that back?
I think some people, and this is sort of the theory of the neocons, they think declaration of war was some real specific antiquated thing that was only done when countries officially declared and there were reasons for it, but it really wasn't to initiate war. So they don't think the words declare war mean initiate war. They think it's something that's now no longer needed and is no longer done, and we have non-state actors, and really we're only declaring war formally when they want to, all this stupid stuff. And so I think that they just completely discount it at all. And many of them will say, and I've had them respond to this to me in the Foreign Relations Committee, they'll say, well, no, the president starts war, you can stop it by defunding the war. And that's exactly the opposite. We do have the ability to defund war, but our founding fathers were very, very clear, every one of them, even from Jefferson all the way over to the other side to Hamilton, every one of them, if you read the Federalist Papers or any of their comments, all mentioned that they took the power to declare war from the president. They didn't want to have a monarchy, and they purposely put that in the legislature. So I think, I don't know, it's a willful denial or ignorance, but really probably just a denial of everything they know that our founding fathers said.
So I'm sort of influenced by public choice economics, and I see some perverse incentives here, particularly when it comes to arms deals to Saudi Arabia. It's a lot of money there. There's a lot of financial interests. There's a lot of fighting over oil. What part of this is all about the money?
Right. The president has said, yeah, we make a lot of money selling stuff to them. I'm of the opinion that arms sales shouldn't be about making money, and that arms are uniquely something that is not a private sale. I know we have private contractors who make them, but the way I look at it is tanks and F-16s and cruise missiles are not widgets or shoes or soccer balls. They aren't the same. And really those companies only exist because overwhelmingly all their money comes from our government. Like 80-90% comes from our government, maybe 10 or 20% comes from foreign governments they sell to. But those weapons are ours. The F-16 technology, the technology of a cruise missile and how they guide it from submarines to specific locations, that is owned by the American taxpayer and is a national security jointly owned thing. And so I'm not for selling weapons to make money. I'm just absolutely opposed to it. I don't care about $1. I don't care if you can sell a rifle to make a buck. That's not why we sell them, and we have restrictions on them. If it were only about making money, we'd sell them to everybody. We'd sell them to China and Russia and North Korea. That'd be foolish, obviously, but we don't. So we only sell them to people who are our strong allies. And I think there's a great deal of evidence that Saudi Arabia is more frenemy. They're sort of sometimes friendly, sometimes enemy. But overall, I think they're really the largest state sponsor of spreading hatred of Christians, Jews, and Hindus throughout the whole world. And that these trillions of dollars we've spent since 9/11 on all the security theater and all the other stuff we do is really because of the Saudis funding the opposite. They have been funding this hatred in all these schools. I mean, there are reports that there's 40,000 religious madrasas in Pakistan alone, and they really truly are a breeding ground. Somebody who's a misfit kid that they can convince to strap on a suicide vest, you know, that somehow he's going to help his family or get martyrdom and money. This is paid for with the Saudis' money, and they've turned their face away from this. And they do some of the stuff at home too. I mean, there's 3,000 dissidents in Saudi Arabia that are being held without trial, and you know, there's several hundred on death row, you know, simply for protesting.
So a lot of chaos that we contribute to. You know, the arms that Americans make are now showing up in Yemen. They're killing people.
Well, look at what happened in Syria, the huge mess that was Syria. Everybody's like, oh, particularly Hillary Clinton, we need to fund these moderate rebels that are in Syria. Well, all of a sudden, there was like $1 billion worth of Humvees being driven by ISIS. There were weapons of ours that were somehow going through Saudi Arabia and Qatar, who were indiscriminately just shipping tons of weapons into Syria, and they frankly don't care what your ideology is. In fact, the more radical, the better. And this is the problem is that, you know, had the rebels won in Syria, and I'm not saying Assad is some great Jeffersonian diplomat or Democrat, but had they won, would it be better to have al-Qaeda-linked al-Nusra radical Sunni extremists in charge of Syria? It's like choose your poison, and I don't think it's worth risking one life and American life. And I also think in the end it backfires for us. We end up thinking we're doing the best, and then we get something worse than what we started with.
So short of Congress taking back its responsibility, what are some specific tactics that you're pursuing to rein some of this bad behavior in?
The vote that we'll have this week is a historic vote, you know, the vote on the Lee Sanders, in the sense that it's invoking the War Powers Act and saying to the president, not only did you not ask us for permission, we are retracting our permission for you to go to war. I don't think this has ever happened. I don't think we've ever had a vote like that where an entire body of Congress passed something. So it's a significant rebuke, it's a significant symbol. It won't pass the House this time, and I'm not sure we can override a veto. So it won't have a force of law, but it's a big step. When you think in our entire country's history, has a part of Congress ever voted to tell the president we can't be at war? Even during the heights of Vietnam, that never happened. At the very end of Vietnam, there was one committee, Pat Leahy was on the committee, he's told me the story. It was like 75 or something. They finally voted to cut off funds. Basically, the war was over at that point. But no one had the courage to cut off funds in 69, 70, 71 during the heights of the protest. So, no, that's a big deal, and so I'm supportive of that. I'm also will continue to pursue privileged resolutions, they can't stop me, to try to stop arms sales to Saudi Arabia. So I've had 2 of those votes, and that was largely thanks to my staff figuring out that this was a privileged resolution from like a 1976 arms export bill that allows me to bring it up. Because a lot of people don't realize the way the Senate or Congress works. It's very hard to get a vote on anything. You've got to be a thorn in their side. You've got to either filibuster or find a way to get something to come forward. And that's one thing that we've done that really probably no other office has done in recent history. I've probably had 60 or 70 votes on amendments. Now, I'm 0 for 60 or 70 right now, but you know, it's hard to beat the establishment. But we do force them to vote on these things. So that's a tool we'll continue to use. And then finally, just talking to the public. I think we win these things with the public. Even the president, to a certain extent, I think leans our direction. You know, his instinct was that the Iraq War was a mistake, that we shouldn't stay in Syria forever. When I talked to him about Afghanistan, he says, yeah, we need to, you know, we don't need to be in Afghanistan. And yet a lot of the people around him are advising him to stay. But even the people around him, you ask Mattis, you ask Pompeo, is there a military solution to Afghanistan? They'll say no. But yet they'll still advocate to send more troops or keep the troops there. You ask them, is there a military solution to Syria? Well, no, but well, we need to stay there. Is there a military solution to Yemen? No, but Al-Qaeda's there, and we kind of still have to be there too. So they kind of admit that there needs to be some kind of negotiated settlements to these places, but none of them ever want to leave.
Let's wrap up with this question about how we engage Americans to pay a little more attention, to care a little more about this. We're in our 18th year in Afghanistan. Right. Libertarians talk about permanent war, and it seems like, you know, for my generation and certainly millennials, they don't know anything else We spent trillions of dollars, thousands of lost lives, just our soldiers alone. Why isn't this the biggest scandal that's racking the Capitol?
I think part of it is, during the Vietnam War, there were many more deaths. So there's 55,000 deaths. We've had fewer deaths. Still about 5,000 to 6,000 people have died. Fewer are dying right now, so it's not in the news as much. And really the war is fought by volunteers, and they're volunteers whose families are obviously proud of them for volunteering for their country, and they aren't really protesting, they're still volunteering. And so I think that's one reason why there's not this sort of uprising. I think that recently there's been more of an uprising because of Khashoggi and the brutality of what the Saudis did to them. There's also the pictures from Yemen of the poor, millions of starving children, the possibility that millions of people could die in Yemen. All of that is bringing things to mind, but really no one's talking about Afghanistan, the longest war, the perpetual war. And so there's a possibility we could use some of these tools perhaps on arms trade to bring up Afghanistan, but we've been looking at that and we think actually the arms that we use there are exempt somehow, or they say that they were authorized after 9/11, which, I keep challenging these people. They come before my committee from the State Department and I say, well, tell me who's left. Tell me their name. Tell me the person's name who's left in Afghanistan who had anything to do with 9/11 that helped, aided, or abetted the terrorists who attacked us. There is no person left. Everybody's dead. And this is a whole new generation. I mean, people live over there about an average of 35 or 40 years. So we're already in another generation of people over there, and they have the same dispute they had previously. And the people are divided, frankly, on who to choose. You can choose the American puppet government, who usually are complicit with drug trade and stealing from the people, and they're basically dishonest. Or you can choose the harshness of the Taliban, which seems to be more honest, but is Stone Age cruelty as far as the way they treat people. And some of Afghanistan's actually choosing the certainty of Stone Age cruelty over the deceit and deceptiveness of 21st century kleptocracy.
So it's kind of lonely taking this position on Capitol Hill, but I couldn't help but notice minds were blown. My mind was blown that Lindsey Graham actually decided to agree with you on something. Is the world gone crazy?
The interesting thing about it is people ask why, and I think it's the brazenness and utter brutality of the Saudi regime. And I think this guy's 33 years old, and this is really, really reckless. Think of the things he's doing. He blockaded Qatar, which had mostly been an ally with Saudi Arabia. He's blockaded Yemen, and they're starving. And then he kills a well-known dissident that writes for a major newspaper in our country, and his brother lures him into the consulate, and there's all kinds of evidence. Maybe he wasn't quite aware that countries spy on each other, but it's, I think because it was so brazen, so bold, and so unheard of, that it brought a lot of people who aren't necessarily together. Now, I think we're going to divide them again, because when it comes to the War Powers Act, I don't think all those Republicans stick with us. Mike Lee and I will, and maybe one or two other Republicans, but all the Democrats have now come together. So some of that's partisanship too, but some of it's bringing people together. There are some Democrats who believe like us, that really do believe in the Constitution on foreign policy and war. There's a whole bunch of them, though, that are just unhappy with the president. So all of that pushes everybody together to have enough. But it's still going to be a significant, I think, attempt to grab back power that is really congressional power.
So you're not backing down?
No, not at all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, first exclusive here on Kibbe on Liberty. You're going to be the first to see the new set, which is a complete wreck. Check it out. We're going to go out the back door. And going into the carriage house in my house. It's like 1860, 1870 built. And the downstairs is actually a garage. We keep one of our cars in here. But upstairs is a color. We're going to watch that for next time. That's so funny. So I hit my head on the staircase.
Oh, we're using that.
Take two, I hit my head on the staircase.
You got that on camera?
Yeah. Okay, my wish would be that you don't see what just happened, but you're going to see it anyway. So you first, for the first time ever, the history making, you're gonna see Kibbe on Liberty, the new set. It's pretty cool, it's pretty sophisticated. We've already invested many, many millions of dollars in set development and real estate acquisition, otherwise known as my garage. And this garage is an old carriage house on Capitol Hill that probably dates 1860, 1870. It's got a second story. Think about that, a two-story garage. Going to avoid hitting my head on that cross beam because that would be bad. Probably be something we need to tell guests moving on in the future. And here it is. Look at this beautiful thing. You will notice first and foremost that I have collected all of the junk that accumulates over 30 plus years of marriage, all of my grandfather's woodworking tools. I originally aspired to be a woodworker, but I never got around to it. All this you know, job stuff got in the way. Over here, check it out, is a string art shark that I made when I was like 12 years old. And probably most cool is this, we'll probably put this up on the set. You can probably see down here the "Don't Tread on Me" flag, signed by a bunch of old former colleagues. We survived a hostile takeover when some members of the Republican Party tried to take us out. That'll probably go up on set, but once this is done, it's going to be a beautiful brick building, and we're going to make it look beautiful. Probably the most important conversations in the history of man will happen right here on Kibbe on Liberty.